Come on, let us go. Here we go. The button is sticking. We are live, guys. Happy Friday. It's been 2 weeks, at least, right? Maybe 3. 2 weeks since we last chatted. So welcome to July, the second half of 2025.
I missed you guys.
Likewise.
Yeah, it was weird, actually.
The dog missed us too.
Tesla's barking.
No, it makes smart noises. It has this whoopee cushion thing. My kids love it. It's called emissions, and all the seats make fart noises. Yeah, but the dog missed us too.
Yeah.
Lots of dogs here in Michigan.
Last week was pretty quiet with the holiday weekend and kind of people taking advantage of either end of it. But this week started off with a bang, right? We've got the Twitterverse added again, and that's been this Vantage 4.0 Pulte tweet has been kind of all over the news feed. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you're seeing and hearing the same thing. I'd love to start the conversation there and just kind of get some perspectives. Christy, I know your credit union uses Vantage Score in parts of your business today, not necessarily mortgage lending, so we could talk about that. Courtney, you've done a little bit of research in terms of comparing Vantage 4.0 to FICO, and you've got kind of the servicing back-end perspective, and then KP, you're fresh off of some conversations that might help us understand where at least one of the GSEs is kind of thinking this thing through. So let's get into it. As always, audience, shoot your comments over. If you have questions for us, put them in the comments, whatever platform you're watching on, and one of us will do our best to moderate that. But let's start with how shocked you were when you saw the tweet in the news. And Christy, we'll start with you.
I was going to say, I've quit being shocked when things come up and just started preparing for this as a normal part of the day. But what's interesting is when you do something like this in a tweet, you leave out a lot of the details, right? 180 characters or however many you get in Twitter X these days leaves a lot to be desired in terms of implementation of something like this. And there were a number of posts, Brian, from you, from Jennifer, I could name a handful of folks who put out some really great questions that we have to think about in terms of what does it mean and how does it impact fair lending and how does it impact processes? Do you have to do this? Do you have to get both? Are you using some kind of an average? If you like one better than the other, which one do you get to pick? And what does that mean when you get audited? How are the regulators going to look at it? So it's great to have a big, bold move and shake up the market, but the implementation of that is going to be considerably longer with many, many more details needed.
Totally agree. And Courtney, just maybe share the reference to the research article that you read up on in looking at the differences between the two models in particular. And then any insights or thoughts you have in terms of where this thing's heading.
Sure. The Urban Institute actually has a good write-up when we started talking about Vantage, I think in 2024. And so there was a pretty good analysis between the two of them. I always want to keep up with my colleagues here on the lending side and understand the downstream impacts of something, even if we are talking about rule making by tweet, which I will resist the urge to discuss the negative downstream implications of issuing rules via executive order or tweet or both at the same time, and the downstream impact on the populace. I think that the most interesting thing that I learned and that you can learn, check it out. It's Lori Goodman and an academic partner, I think from Indiana, put it together. The long and the short of it is that there's not a dramatic difference between the two. Vantage prioritizes in its compound score certain items higher in the waterfall than FICO does. The observations were twofold. Vantage tends to be 10 to 14 points higher than FICO, largely because of that waterfall and the breakdown there. And that, and this is something that we jammed on a little bit before we got here. that it's the longer view impacts that we really have to, look at. What happens when you do have two providers in the marketplace that are providing credit scores, and what goes into those scores? Are there ways that we can open the aperture of seeing a person's ability to make a payment, make a regular monthly payment, and does that change, right? And I think that we've seen some of those things be introduced into FICO. I think Fannie and Freddie have been open to that. I think that, components of that, of course, are, the future of work. And, a lot of young folks are moving away from the corporate America model, moving away from systemic control. And I don't know. I think that it goes to be seen in the longer term. The two big things on my side is that typically in mortgage servicing, if we're looking at your credit is usually not in a great place anyway. I think for recapture retention, it's something to look at. But from a technological operational deployment perspective, that's where I have the big question for Vantage. Until we see some of these advantages that was like a double entendre. Until we see some of these advantages in the marketplace of using Vantage, the Vantage advantage, if you will, is the juice worth the squeeze with regard to deploying a second credit provider in your midst? I think most aggressive lenders these days would say yes, because anything that we can do to, get to an approval status for a client is good. But then I would bring in the responsibility component, as I always do at the end of the day, which is if you really have to pull a second credit score to reach an extra couple points to get your client approved for something, are you creating affordability issues? ?
So Courtney, we did an interesting thing, and this has been a number of years ago at a couple of jobs previous. One of the things we analyzed was, why did people do rapid rescores or rescores of any type? And you know what the data showed us? It wasn't about whether or not they got approved. It was actually getting them a better rate.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
Yeah, but the plus and minus to that was, generally speaking, the extra work and the cost for the rapid rescore was far more expensive than just giving the customer a better rate and buying it down, or paying for that as an organization versus what it cost us to do that work and do the rapid rescore. But the fact of the matter is, what we discovered is we didn't actually change whether or not people qualified. We only got them a difference in interest rate.
I think that's a really interesting point. Rapid rescores are expensive, though. We see a ton of that. We get bludgeoned on the servicing side from you nice lending folks when you think that there is a problem with the payment history, and I'll just leave it at that.
If folks want to understand more about Vantage, the business, the company, and how they started, shout out to my buddy Greg Scher. Greg is hosting Barrett Burns. Barrett's one of the founders of Vantage Score. He's since retired, but Barrett will be on with Greg's one-on-one on Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern, right here on this LinkedIn channel. So if you're tuned in and RSVPing to Greg's one-on-one, you'll get it on your feed. Otherwise, I would suggest going out there and getting that on your calendar. That should be an interesting conversation. I remember meeting Barrett and Bill Bracken. When Phil was at Vantage, they were spending a lot of time with us at Flagstar. We were, closely evaluating and understanding the model early on. So that'll be a good conversation for folks. If you want to just, get educated, as they say, on the topic a little bit more, that'll be an interesting conversation. As I think about Vantage at FinLocker, we've been on Vantage Score since day one, and we made a decision way back when to do it for a bunch of strategic reasons. And one of the things that we see in our data is just the fact that someone is credit visible oftentimes earlier than they would be just in pure FICO opens the door for them to kind of start maybe preparing with a little more certainty and focus when they're actually in the system, so to speak. I don't know that we've seen anybody, become approve eligible because of Vantage or not. But we definitely see folks that otherwise would not have had a score in the other model show up. And I think it does lend to that early, early engagement, early preparation. I'm all thrown off because it's Friday and KP's in his office. This is not the the normal.
He's thrown us a curveball today.
Well, just too many people at my house, and I had to make a hard pivot. Plus, I've got a national TPO call here in about 50 minutes. I would kind of zoom, way out. I mean, this thing started with Dr. Sandra Thompson when she was FHFA director. And, I was in a meeting at an executive roundtable with Enact MI this week. And on Wednesday, Sonu was there. He runs single family for Freddie Mac. And, he said it perfectly. Like, this is a top-down directive, right? And so whether it's through an X post or whatever, current director Bill Pulte said, hey, we're doing this thing. And, at the NBA secondary in New York in May, some executives at us were in a closed-door meeting with him. And obviously, I can't share everything in there, but I can share what he said on stage. But I feel like, they want to bust up the FICO monopoly. So the easiest and path of least resistance for them is to simply refresh what's been worked on for 2 years or more. And so, everyone was scrambling when the tweet came out. We had our Monday morning executive committee meeting with the NBA, Pete Mills and team, Justin and Pete and just, all the others on the call. They did a good job of talking about that. And Freddie and them were like, all right, well, we have to refresh everything we've been working on this and start to answer some of the questions. I haven't heard from Fannie. I'm sure they're doing the same thing. So, it's comforting to know the GSEs are just as scrambly as the rest of us. So we're just trying to figure it out. And I personally, knowing the roots of this and knowing the one report that everything hinged on and it's supposed to be better, is it worth all the stuff we have to go through to make sure that we implement it? I mean, I don't think so, but if it's a stair step to get to something which could be a bottom up approach, which the NBA is pushing a single merge initiative, it'll save us money and it will still yield about the same amount of credit invisible borrowers. Because, the new FICO score, just like the Vantage score, which I love how you said advantage with your double entendre there, Courtney. Maybe it's called Vantage because they don't have the word add because it doesn't really add any value. Remains to be seen. Not talking smack. I just don't know. So at the end of the day, I mean, some of our biggest lenders literally spend over $240 million a year on credit reports. And for what? To have an 8% pull through if you're consumer direct, and so it's a lot of money that's being spent and now more money to implement something new that the difference may be negligible. Having said that, I think all of us agree, if we find one more borrower out there because of whatever credit report we use, if we had the option to pull a single Vantage and a single FICO, the cost would be significant. And then you would get the advantage of trying to find credit invisible borrowers. And I think that cost savings for lenders would go a long way because we could put it back into price or development and investment in our operations and teams and technology to make sure that we offer a better offering for borrowers. And so I think the win-win is being set up down the road. I hope the NBA is successful with the single bureau, whether from Vantage or FICO. I think ultimately that might be the path we go to. I still think it's kind of, the whole thing is kind of silly because, the whole credit regime is kind of fighting the last war, which is 2008. And the reality is default rate almost always mirrors the unemployment rate. So, we're trying to make sure we do good loans that don't default, but people really only default when they lose their job. I mean, that's the main reason. They don't default because they took out a car loan, having said that, I can't predict the future, but, again, we're all faced with top-down directives, and now we're all just having to scramble and try and make it work.
KP,
go ahead. I was going to say, I like the money approach on this one, KP, particularly because, so many consumer-facing tools now offer consumers a free view of their credit score. It, shows you how your credit score is broken down. There's a lot of, consumer facing tools in the mortgage marketplace. I think in banking, they've 100% gone there. American Express does a good job. I would say Chime is a really interesting online bank that I would encourage everybody to take a peek at in terms of, bringing consumers access to good data and good information about where they stand, and helping them build credit. I was unfamiliar with that metric that you just said a minute ago. The $240 million number made me go a little bit over here on my side, because I'm always trying to save a dime here and there. If consumers themselves have access to this information through all of these means that don't mimic that, why are we spending that much money on the lending side to get there? And that's silly. And so that sounds like something we should start legislating by a tweet. Who has X?
I mean, I have a Twitter account. You think I could do that?
Yeah, maybe try.
We'll see if it sticks. So I think KP brings up two really good points. One is the cost, right? So there is a cost component to this that we've got to get the cost under control, because it's impacting consumers in a very, very negative way. And so how do we do that? The second is, are we actually getting more borrowers that become credit visible and can get into a home in an appropriate and in a way that's affordable and responsible? And Ira, one of our folks who's always with us here on these Friday calls, Ira Selwyn over at US Mortgage, said, hey, look, we can already use rental history. And we've seen approvals change because we've added that rental information. So what do we use credit scores for? Like, how valuable are they? They certainly play a role in the process, but a lot of times it's really more about pricing than approval. And I mean, even from the dark ages when I started in this business and we did manually underwritten loans. Before, by the way, when I started, we didn't even pull credit scores. That wasn't even a part of the process to do so. We had a full RMCR, and you verified a bunch of different things, and you could go and verify somebody's gym payments or their insurance payments or their utility payments and help make them credit visible. And there was a process to do that. We kind of went away from that over a period of time because we went to all this automation and it's this whole like, hey, we've got a manual process to do this. So are we solving a problem that doesn't exist when we say we're trying to get more people to be able to be qualified? Maybe we dust off some of the things that we used to do that worked pretty well. And then we explore the cost of, hey, do we actually have to have this? How does this impact our MI partners? How does this impact the securitization process? Some of the downstream impacts, as opposed to saying we just want to get to one. What we want to do is impact housing affordability and the cost to manufacture a loan.
You're on mute, KP.
I was trying to be respectful. Yeah, that securitization process is what's got the FICO regime locked in, right? Because the secondary market is used to buying MBS and trading mortgage-backed securities based on a loan level pricing adjustment, a loan level LLPA grid on FICO score. And, you brought up these single merge, Credit Karma, Chime, all these ones that are out there. We're the only loan in securitization that is locked up like this. And we have decades of history of performance. You get a car loan, you get a private loan, you get a credit card loan, you pull the cheap little pennies for a record of credit file. I mean, the actual credit data, the little trade lines for each borrower, it literally costs pennies. And so, but then it gets, put together in an algorithm that's this big secret and then spits out as a score. And, now the whole secondary market's used to mortgage-backed securities, being rated investment grade quality based on that score. I think there's a path to get there without having to go down that regime and go to the Credit Karma, the single route, like all the other private label securities that are out there. Again, I contend that, the unemployment rate is really the only thing that matters. I'm not saying if someone has a bankruptcy or a foreclosure that it doesn't matter, but you can see that for pennies, not for, 80, 120, $150, for a tri-merge, and so It's an absolute racket. And I will say, in Bill Pulte's defense, he's actually been very vocal about trying to break that monopoly up. My hope is that this tweet is a step in that direction, but isn't the ultimate path.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of way I look at it too. Is there needed to be another push? This is the push. We'll see if it. I don't think we'll see anything meaningful in this calendar year, but hopefully by the turn of the calendar into the new year, 2026, we kind of have a path to where this actually comes into play. I always think about things in terms of the loan officers that have to face off with all of the consumers. And like most stuff that we see from inside the industry, I doubt this one's really hitting home with consumers at large, right? The average consumer is still, they're not paying attention to Bill Pulte. This is probably a little bit of a nothing burger in the grand scheme of things with consumers. However, we do have loan officers that check us out every Friday. What would you guys, what are you coaching your loan officers to say and do with consumers if this is kind of a conversation piece that comes up? I'll start with you, Christy.
Well, I think that there's to every component, as you mentioned, there's an education piece. And I agree that most borrowers aren't looking at it. Think about what Courtney said about going to Credit Karma or going to your bank and they give you your credit score.
Yeah.
I think that there's an education component that says, look, the credit score you get inside your bank app or from a service you subscribe to is actually different than the credit score I'm looking at because it's weighted differently, it looks different, and that's what this is. So it may be better for you, it may not be better for you. You don't know what that looks like. And then you get into this whole concept of what we've just talked about. Well, how is the credit score actually used and what does it impact? And
right.
Is that really a true picture of my ability to repay? We already had this conversation around whether or not medical debts are included. And, the administration has already taken the stance that medical debt shouldn't be included. And that's making its way through all the things that have to happen with where that looks. Personally, I don't think that a medical debt tells me whether or not somebody's going to repay their mortgage or their auto loan, because those circumstances are generally outside of people's control.
Yeah, the stories behind it are always important. The stories behind it are basically what I do for a living. And I will say time and time again, no one stays in mortgage servicing if they're motivated by the money behind it. It's really the opportunity.
Courtney, you get what Paul Harvey called the rest of the story. Oftentimes.
Yeah. Oh, and sometimes the whole story, and sometimes my personal cell phone rings, and I literally ask, "How did you get this number?" And it's cool. I like that part of it. But I think that very much like some of the people that we were just talking about, Phil Bracken included, I think that home ownership is not quite a right, but it should be something that everyone has the opportunity to experience. And, a lot of folks don't have an upbringing that supports, having a FICO score at all, right? Or, maybe they work for themselves and they can't pull their numbers together in the right way, or, any of these other things that you can talk about. But there are things like rent. I'll say, Ira mentioned that in the chat, and I think that that's really important. I mean, all of us pay our cell phone bills every month, right? In theory. How else are we going to doom scroll at night instead of watch TV because TV is so out? It's these types of things that, the ability to make regular payments and understand it, also just general cash flow, right, in your bank account. Are your monthly expenses not exceeding the income that you are making? And looking at that in a big picture, honoring the story behind whatever that is, I think is really important.
Amen. All right, 5 minutes left.
This was a big topic to bite off today. There's a lot of things that go into it. Clearly.
There's one more issue, like non-consumer driven, that I think is going to be interesting and important in how it plays out. And I would say in MSR sales. The anti-system light within me wants to raise a little antenna on this one, because you find in MSR sales frequently Buyers and buyers are designating certain providers. And before right now, FICO was the only provider. Now, if Vantage is a provider, are certain institutions going to require a type of score associated with the underlying assets? One. And then two, how are we going to price and evaluate MSR, right, with a different score at the table? Do we just keep the old FICO model? Question mark. I mean, Kevin might know a little bit more about this. I would also say that, it invites an interesting potential monopolistic practice on the FICO side, particularly if people start designating FICO over Vantage, where Vantage is going to have to be the little engine that could, in terms of, creating widespread usage of itself. Because if everyone sticks with FICO, is Vantage, up Schitt's Creek without a paddle? Question mark.
Well, that's when I say securitization, that's what I'm talking about, right? So
no, for sure. But I think that understanding what that means at the component level, I think is how you see the impact.
Yeah, and just like the NBA is back testing 2 million credit reports on a single in file, as opposed to a tri-merge, showing that the disparity of picking one, to try and defend from gaming the system. Yeah. Disparity is like 12 to 13 points on the score of using a single versus a tri-merge. And so Vantage, if they're good, they can just back test as well and show a report on how good their score is to show the mortgage-backed security market that there is stability in investment grade quality MBS, or MSR, or however you call it. And I'll just say it again. We just buy and sell money. Like, take all the stories out of it and the stuff that we love. We buy and sell money. That's what we do in this business. The home and the land are collateral. If it defaults, what do you fall back on? The home and the land, which, by the way, we're undersupplied, record equity, don't have enough homes out there for sale. And I mean, the second rates come down to 6.4%. All these stories of, inventory is the highest it's been in years. It's the highest it's been in years. It's been shit for years. It's like, 0.01 plus 0.01 is 0.02. So,
it's twice as much.
Yeah. It's 200%, Logan had a good tweet, 600% increase in default rate. Yeah, we went from 0.01 to 0.06. It's nothing. So the market's actually in a very healthy spot to absorb any kind of kerfuffle that would come from getting MSR, securitization, MBS on a new scoring system. So yes, we've beaten this one to death.
I think the ultimate advice is right on your T-shirt, KP.
Keep calm and blend on.
Keep calm. Well, just the top part. Keep calm. Keep calm.
I got this shirt when I bought that. It's like that big Kickstarter thing when you bought the cooler that had a blender on it. Anyway,
I love it.
But
these things take years to come out, right? And so.
The fact is, they may change too over time. We may start one way and learn, and it's a Kaizen process that you see what works, and then you may make a change. In addition, in the pre-conversation that we had as we were waiting for the time, the ball to drop and for us to be able to go live, was, you got to prioritize this too. How soon is this going to get implemented? Let's say that let's say that tweet had all the magic information that we needed and we're ready to implement it. Where does it get prioritized in a world where there are so many changes and so many things going on that you have a limited capacity to actually execute?
And speaking of changes, I think it's worth getting this in because I thought it was a very immediate change, which has immediate impact. Trump versus Casa, the Supreme Court ruled that federal courts and district courts don't have the right to go out and create an injunction on this administration's executive orders or actions. And so, traditionally it's like, if there's a court case brought up and brought to the court, then that court is looked at on the merits. Whereas these courts are going out with no court case saying, you can't fire all the people in DC, or you can't send immigrants back home, or whatever. And that's an interesting thing, not just for this current presidency, but all presidencies going forward for the rest of our lifetime. What kind of power does the executive branch have, and how much reach or overreach does the judicial branch have? And apparently the Supreme Court said we can't do this. And so what's interesting is that in the jobs report, like we received last Thursday, government jobs at the state and local level were 75,000, over half of the 147,000. But we all know that the federal jobs are the ones being cut by this current administration. There's as much as 288,000 jobs that have been cut or in the process of being cut or held up in court, or maybe they got rehired. That's why they're not showing up in the day. 288,000 jobs is pretty meaningful, especially if it's from entities we all deal with every day. And so when the Supreme Court says, no, they have the right to do this, I thought it was interesting that the CFPB union said, well, we have a case in court, so that doesn't apply to us because the injunction wasn't on an overreach on something that's not in court. We have a case in court today, and we want to see it through. How many of these 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 people can be let go at the CFPB and still carry out the mandate of their mission? What are the details of that? Does the Supreme Court have the right to even look into that? So I thought that was a pretty interesting immediate impact, which, it ties into this Vantage Score thing, because now Fannie and Freddie are up to their eyeballs just trying to get out an LLPA grid, and they can't work on other projects, especially if they lose people, especially if the CFPB loses people, or HUD or Ginnie. So, it's a pretty interesting court case that is going to have an immediate impact right away in our businesses.
I'm glad we got that one in, KP. That'll be a good one to kind of follow up on next week. And I don't think we've heard the last on Vantage 4.0. I know the team at Housing Wire is doing some follow up as well. So maybe we'll see another tweet or two this weekend, and we'll have something new to talk about next week. But until then, guys, always enjoy these Friday wrap ups. We'll be back here next Friday, same channel, same time, same team too, right? Courtney, you're not off till the week after. Awesome.
I'm off.
You're off next week.
I'm actually off.
All right. Good for you.
We should talk about tariffs. All right. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.